I'm Steven, 34 male. I live in a quiet suburban town in a modest two-bedroom house I was incredibly proud to buy on my own. As a senior financial auditor, my life is about details, numbers, and the logical flow of things, so owning a piece of the world that was verifiably mine felt like the ultimate achievement. It was a culmination of years of quiet, diligent work, a stark contrast to the flash and drama that defined the rest of my family. The story I'm about to tell you is about how that quiet life was disturbed, and how the skills from my very logical profession helped me execute a plan that was anything but. It's a story about a house, a mansion, and the shocking revelation that the ground beneath your feet might not be as solid as you think. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air, a scent I had come to associate with victory. My house wasn't large, but it was mine. Every square foot of its polished hardwood floors, every one of its newly glazed windows represented a bonus I'd earned, a weekend I'd worked. It stood on a quarter-acre lot with a burgeoning oak tree in the backyard that was probably older than the entire suburb. I'd spent a month doing nothing but painting, fixing leaky faucets, and learning more about basic plumbing than I ever thought possible. It was my sanctuary. So when my mother, Brenda, and my older sister, Jessica, came for the official tour, I was beaming with pride. I had a cheese board laid out, a bottle of decent red wine uncorked, and a genuine smile on my face that had been all too rare during our family get-togethers. "Stephen, darling, it's cozy," my mother said as she stepped inside, her eyes doing a rapid, dismissive scan of the living room. Brenda, a retired nurse, had a way of using caring words to deliver clinical, cutting assessments. Cozy was her code for small. My sister Jessica, ever the art gallery curator, glided in behind her. She placed a hand on a wall I had just painted a calming sage green. "The color is a choice," she remarked, her lips pursed in a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. She and her husband, David, were in the process of building what they called their forever home, a project my mother spoke of in the same reverent tones one might use for the construction of a cathedral. I tried to steer the tour toward the things I loved. "I completely redid the kitchen," I said, leading them past the living room. "New countertops, new backsplash, the works." My mother ran a manicured finger over the quartz surface. "It's very practical, dear." There it was again, the faint praise that damns. "You know, Jessica's architect just sourced the marble for her kitchen island directly from a quarry in Italy," David insisted. "The vein patterns are supposed to be magnificent." I just nodded, my smile starting to feel like a mask. "That sounds nice." The tour continued in much the same fashion. My renovated bathroom was functional. My spacious backyard was a lot of work to maintain. Every feature of my home was immediately and unfavorably compared to the hypothetical, unseen grandeur of Jessica's future mansion. The conversation was a performance, and I was the only one who didn't seem to have the script. My sister and mother had a seamless rhythm, a conversational dance where one would offer a piece of information about Jessica's palace, and the other would elaborate on its splendor. The final blow came as we were sitting in the living room, a palpable tension filling the space my new couch was supposed to make comfortable. I poured my mother a cup of tea, the steam rising between us. She took a delicate sip, placed the cup back on its saucer with a soft click, and looked at me with an expression of practiced pity. "Stephen," she began, her voice soft and heavy with faux concern, "I hope you don't take this the wrong way. I'm proud of you, I truly am, but looking at this place," she gestured vaguely at my entire home, "it's a bit pathetic compared to what your sister is building, it just is." The word hung in the air, pathetic. Jessica, for her part, didn't object. She just gave a little sigh as if the burden of her own success was simply too heavy to bear. "Mom, don't be so blunt," she said, though her tone lacked any real heat. It was the kind of token defense that only amplified the initial insult. "Stephen did a great job with his budget." My budget, the subtext was clear. This was the best I could do, a minor league effort in a world where my sister was playing in the major leagues. My years of work, my careful savings, my pride, all of it was reduced to a footnote in the grand story of Jessica's success. I felt a familiar coldness spread through my chest. It was a feeling I'd had many times before. The quiet resignation of the other child, the one who was reliable, stable, and completely, utterly uncelebrated. Jessica was the golden child, the one whose every achievement was magnified, whose every whim was indulged. I was the placeholder, the baseline against which her brilliance was measured. I looked from my mother's pitying face to my sister's condescending one. I wanted to scream. I wanted to list my accomplishments, to defend my choices, to demand to know why nothing I ever did was good enough. But I didn't. As a financial auditor, I was trained to control my reactions, to observe, to gather data before acting. An emotional outburst was a liability. It gave the other party power. So I did the only thing I could. I picked up my own cup of tea, took a slow, deliberate sip, and held my mother's gaze. "I appreciate your honesty, Mom," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "More tea." The placid response seemed to unsettle them more than an argument would have. They exchanged a quick, confused glance. They had expected me to be hurt, to be defensive. They had not expected serene acceptance, but what they saw as acceptance was actually something else entirely. It was the moment a long-dormant switch was flipped. The anger was there, but it wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold, calculating, and patient. As they left my pathetic little house that afternoon, leaving a trail of condescension in their wake, they had no idea that they hadn't just insulted my home. They had laid the first stone in the foundation of their own downfall. The dynamic in my family wasn't born overnight. It was a carefully constructed ecosystem that had been cultivated for over 30 years, with my sister Jessica firmly at its center. She wasn't just the golden child, she was the sun around which my mother, Brenda, orbited. I was more like a distant planet, acknowledged but cold and mostly ignored unless my trajectory could somehow serve the system. Jessica was older by 2 years, a gap that felt more like a chasm. From our earliest days, her accomplishments were framed and mounted, while mine were met with a simple nod. Her first finger painting was hailed as the work of a budding Picasso. My meticulously built Lego castles were just messing up the living room. When she won a third-place ribbon in a school poetry contest, my mother had it professionally framed. When I won the state-level mathletes competition, my mother said, "That's nice, dear, don't let it get to your head. Humility is important." The message was clear and consistent. Jessica's efforts were extraordinary, while mine were merely expected. She was the artist, the free spirit, the one with flair. I was the practical one, the steady one, the one who was good with numbers. My reliability became a cage. It meant I was never in trouble, but it also meant I was never the focus of attention. Brenda's energy was consumed by Jessica's dramas, her triumphs, and her endless needs. I learned to be self-sufficient because I had no other choice. As we grew older, the disparity only deepened. Jessica went to a liberal arts college to study art history, a decision lauded as following her passion. I went to the state university for accounting, a choice deemed sensible. When she graduated with a mountain of student debt and no clear career path, my parents paid it off without a second thought. When I graduated with honors and a job offer, I was expected to start paying them rent for the room I was still living in while I saved up for my own place. Her marriage to David, a slick and ambitious investment banker, was the ultimate validation of her golden status. David was loud, wore expensive suits, and had a portfolio that my mother loved to quote during holiday dinners. He was the perfect match for Jessica's curated life. He provided the financial means for her to float from one project to another: a failed jewelry line, a short-lived lifestyle blog, and finally the art gallery curator position, which was funded almost entirely by David's circle of wealthy patrons. Their masterpiece, the thing that solidified their reign, was the mansion. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Perched on a hill in the most exclusive part of the county, the plot of land alone was worth a fortune. It was a 5-acre lot known as Oakhaven Crest, a name that sounded like it was pulled from a fantasy novel. Brenda was the project's unofficial public relations manager. David managed to get the last premium plot at Oakhaven, she would announce to anyone who would listen. "The views are simply breathtaking. Jessica is having a custom closet built that's bigger than Steven's entire living room. Can you imagine?" I didn't have to imagine. I was given weekly, sometimes daily updates. I knew about the heated marble floors in the master bathroom, the 6-car garage, the infinity pool that was designed to look like it was spilling over the hillside. I knew the name of the arc: Heidecht from Milan and the landscape designer from Bordeaux. Each detail was a weapon, a carefully polished stone thrown at my pathetic little house. The cruelty of it was how they framed it as sharing good news. "Oh, Stephen, you'll never guess, the Sub-Zero fridge for the outdoor kitchen just arrived," Jessica would trill over the phone. "You simply have to come see it, it's an absolute beast." The implication was that I should be happy for her, that her joy should be my joy. To express anything less, annoyance, jealousy, or just plain weariness, was to be petty. To point out that they were being obnoxious was to be bitter. They had created a perfect emotional shield. Their bragging was disguised as inclusivity, their arrogance as excitement. I remember one particular Sunday dinner. a few weeks after the disastrous housewarming. The entire meal was a monologue about the mansion's progress. David was explaining the complexities of installing a smart home system that could be controlled from his phone anywhere in the world. "I'll be able to preheat the sauna from my office in the city," he boasted, leaning back in his chair. "Jess can make sure the champagne is chilled to the perfect temperature before we even pull into the driveway." Brenda clapped her hands together in delight. "Oh, that's marvelous. It's like living in the future. Stephen, isn't that just incredible?" I was pushing a pea around my plate with a fork. "It sounds very convenient," I said, my voice flat. David smirked at me. "Convenience is the new luxury, Stephen. You should try it sometime." That was their core belief, that they were living a superior life and it was my own fault for not keeping up. My quiet, stable, self-made life was in their eyes a failure of ambition. The fact that I was debt-free, owned my own home without help, and had a secure career meant nothing. I didn't have an infinity pool. I didn't have Italian marble. My throne was a small, sturdy chair I had built myself, but in the shadow of Jessica's gilded seat of power, it was invisible. That night I went home not just angry, but with a cold clarity. They weren't just building a house. They were building a monument to my perceived inadequacy, and every time they mentioned it, they were just adding another layer of mortar, solidifying my place in the dirt beneath their feet. But they had forgotten something fundamental, something I learned from years of auditing complex financial statements. Even the grandest structures can be brought down by a single, overlooked flaw in the foundation. The seed of a plan didn't come to me in a flash of vengeful inspiration. It started as a tiny, nagging inconsistency, a loose thread that my auditor's brain couldn't help but pull. For weeks after the pathetic comment, I tried to let it go. I focused on my work, on my garden, on the simple joys of my new home. I muted the family group chat and let my mother's calls go to voicemail more often than not. I was building a wall of indifference, or so I told myself. The first crack appeared thanks to Mr. Henderson. George Henderson was a retired contractor who lived 2 streets down from me. He was in his early 70s with a handshake like a vice grip and a perpetually flour-dusted pair of overalls. He'd been a friend of my father's before he passed away, and he held a quiet, grandfatherly affection for me. He'd also, over the years, developed a healthy skepticism of Brenda and Jessica's dramatics. He stopped by one Saturday morning to bring me a tomato plant, and I'd invited him in for coffee. We were sitting on my back patio, overlooking the yard I was slowly taming. "Heard your sister's building a castle on the hill," he said, stirring his coffee. "Oakhaven Crest, isn't it?" "That's the one," I replied, trying to sound neutral. "The eighth wonder of the world, according to my mother." Mr. Henderson chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "It's a prime piece of land, no doubt, but a tricky one. The developer who originally owned that whole tract, a fellow named Marcus Thorne, went bust about 10 years back. It was a mess. The bank took over most of the parcels, but a few of the titles got tangled up in shell corporations and legal disputes. Surprised your brother-in-law managed to get a clean title on that top lot." I leaned forward, my interest piqued. "What do you mean, tangled up?" "Well," he said, taking a sip, "Thorne was a shrewd operator. He'd set up these little LLCs for each parcel to shield himself from liability. When his main company went under, tracking down the true ownership of some of those smaller plots became a nightmare. Most got sorted out, sold off by the bank. But I remember hearing whispers that one or two were still in legal limbo, owned by a holding company nobody could properly trace." He tapped his temple. "Old contractors gossip, you know, probably nothing. David's a big-shot banker, I'm sure his lawyers are top-notch." "But the seed was plan." Ted, a tangled title, a legal limbo. It was the kind of detail that most people would dismiss as gossip, but to a financial auditor it was a signal. It was a deviation from the expected process, an anomaly that required investigation. That evening, my curiosity got the better of me. My sister had been posting nonstop on her social media about the mansion's progress, using a sickening hashtag, Henderson David Dreambuild. Scrolling through her feed was usually a form of self-torture, but this time I was looking for something specific. Amidst photos of blueprints and designer fabric swatches, I found a post from a few months back. It was a picture of her and David beaming, holding a bottle of champagne in front of a sign that read "Future Home of the Hendersons." Behind them, barely visible but there, was a larger real estate sign. I zoomed in. The sign didn't say "Sold by Major Real Estate Brokerage." It said "Private Sale Facilitated by Sterling Equity Partners." Sterling Equity Partners. It didn't sound like a standard realtor. It sounded like a boutique investment firm, the kind that handled complex off-market deals. The kind a guy like David would use to feel exclusive. The final piece of the puzzle fell into my lap a week later during an obligatory phone call with my mother. She was, as usual, providing a status report from the construction site. And the foundation is completely poured, she chirped. David is so clever, he said they had to rush it. My ears perked up. Rush it, why? Oh, some silly permit thing. He said they had a provisional foundation permit that was about to expire, so they had to get the concrete in before the end of the month. Something about securing their claim. It's all terribly technical. Anyway, once the foundation is in, he said, it's basically irreversible. Their position is locked in. The phone call ended, but her words echoed in my mind. Provisional permit, securing their claim, irreversible. This wasn't the language of a straightforward, clean-titled land purchase. This was the language of risk and leverage. A provisional permit suggests that not all conditions for a full permit have been met. Pouring a foundation on such a permit is a gamble, a way to create facts on the ground to strengthen your position in a potential dispute. David wasn't just building a house, he was trying to solidify a weak claim by sinking millions of dollars of concrete and steel into it. He was arrogant. He was assuming that no one would or could challenge him once the structure was physically there. He was assuming no one was looking closely. I sat down at my computer, the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dark room. Mr. Henderson's gossip, the private equity firm's name, my mother's unwitting confession, they were all data points. Individually, they were circumstantial. Together, they painted a picture of hubris and potential vulnerability. The grand, unassailable throne my sister was building for herself suddenly looked like it might have a few cracks in its foundation. And I, with my patient, meticulous, detail-oriented mind, was the perfect person to find out just how deep those cracks went. The hunt began. My day job consisted of staring at spreadsheets, following money through labyrinthine corporate structures, and finding the single misplaced decimal point that could unravel a fraudulent scheme. I decided to apply the same methodology to Oakhaven Crest. My target wasn't a company's balance sheet, it was a 5-acre plot of land. My first step was the county's public records database. It was clunky, outdated, and about as user-friendly as a tax code, but to me it was familiar territory. I searched for the parcel number corresponding to Jessica and David's lot. The ownership history was, as Mr. Henderson had suggested, a mess. It had been owned by Marcus Thorne's development company, then transferred to a subsidiary LLC, then seized by a bank, then the trail got murky. The current owner of record wasn't David or Jessica. It wasn't even Sterling Equity Partners. The owner was listed as an entity called Northwood Holdings LLC. I pulled the corporate filings for Northwood. It was registered in Delaware, a classic move for creating anonymity. The registered agent was a generic corporate services company, another dead end. There were no officer names, no directors listed publicly. It was a ghost. This was where David's arrogance became his undoing. He likely believed no one would bother to dig this deep. He had a contract, probably from Sterling Equity Partners, giving him the right to purchase and build. He probably thought that was enough. But a contract to purchase is not the same as a deed of ownership. He was building his dream house on land he didn't technically own yet. He was betting that the mysterious Northwood Holdings was either defunct or would eventually sign the final papers without issue. It was a calculated risk, but a risk non-ethels. My next step was to figure out who was behind Sterling Equity Partners. A quick search revealed it was a two-man operation run out of a swanky downtown office. They specialized in distressed assets and special situations. This confirmed my suspicion. They weren't just realtors, they were middlemen who found complicated assets and connected them with high-risk, high-reward buyers like David. They likely charged an astronomical fee for the privilege. But who had they made the deal with? Who had signed on behalf of Northwood Holdings? This was the crucial question. Public records were a dead end. I needed another angle. That's when I remembered my father. Before he passed, he had a small hobby of investing in local real estate. Nothing major, just a duplex here, a small commercial property there. His lawyer, the one who handled all those small-time deals, was a man named Arthur Vance. Arthur was semi-retired now, but his mind was still a steel trap for local history and property law. He'd always had a soft spot for me, seeing my father's quiet diligence in me. I called him, I framed it as a professional curiosity. Arthur, I said, I'm looking at a property in the Oakhaven tract for a client. The title history is a bit of a maze. Ever heard of an LLC called Northwood Holdings? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Northwood, he said, his voice a low drawl. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a dog's age. That was one of Marcus Thorne's ghosts. What do you mean? I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Marcus was clever, Arthur explained. Before he went belly up, he knew the vultures would be circling. He transferred a few of his choicest parcels into these phantom LLCs. The idea was to shield them from the bankruptcy proceedings, let them lie dormant for a decade, and then reclaim them when the dust settled. He put them in the names of people he trusted, people who owed him favors, who wouldn't show up on any official documents. His old secretary, a cousin in another state. People who were practically untraceable. My mind was racing, so who controls Northwood? Ah, there's the million-dollar question, Arthur said. The man who held the paper for Northwood was Thorne's original site foreman, a fellow named Stanislaw Kowalski, a quiet, old-school Polish gentleman. Marcus put the LLC in Stanislaw's name because the man was loyal as a dog and completely off the grid. No credit cards, no digital footprint. Thorne figured no one would ever find him. When Thorne died a few years back, that loose end was never tied up. As far as the law is concerned, Stanislaw Kowalski's signature is the only one that matters for that land. Where is he now? I asked, barely breathing. Last I heard, he'd retired back to the old country a decade ago, Arthur said. Probably living in a little village somewhere in Poland. No idea he's sitting on a multi-million-dollar plot of land in America. The phone call ended and I sat in stunned silence. I had found it, the single critical flaw in the entire structure. David, with all his money and bluster, had built his entire dream on a foundation of sand. He had a contract from a middleman who had a contract from who knows where, but none of them had the one thing that mattered, the signature of a retired construction worker in Poland. David was likely paying some holding fee to Sterling, waiting for them to procure the final signature, a process that was probably taking years and costing him a fortune in legal fees. His rush to build was an act of desperation, an attempt to claim squatters' rights on a grand scale. The paper trail had led me from a county database to a Delaware filing and finally to a name, Stanislaw Kowalski. My family, in their arrogance, saw only the land, the view, the mansion. They never thought to look at the paper, but the paper was everything. And now I was the only one who knew which piece of paper truly mattered. The quiet auditor had found the fatal error in their accounting. Finding Stanislaw Kowalski was the next challenge. It was one thing to have a name, it was another to find a man who was intentionally off the grid and living in another continent. My usual tools, databases, financial records were useless here. I needed a different kind of expert. I hired a private investigator, not a shady character from a film noir, but a reputable international researcher who specialized in finding missing persons for estate and probate cases. Her name was Alina, and she was clinical, efficient, and expensive. It was a significant chunk of my savings, but I considered it an investment. I gave her the name, the approximate age, and the last known detail. He was a retired construction foreman who had returned to Poland. While Alina worked her magic across the Atlantic, I turned my attention to the legal side. I re-engaged Arthur Vance not just for advice but to represent me. I explained the situation in full, the family dynamic, David's gamble, and my intention. I needed to be ready to act the moment Stanislaw was found. Arthur was intrigued. It's audacious, Stephen, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. But legally, if you can get to Kowalski and he's willing to sell, David's claim is worth less than the paper it's printed on. He's a tenant. A very, very well-funded tenant who is building a multi-million-dollar structure on property he's merely renting. We drafted the paperwork. It was an airtight purchase agreement. I wasn't going to make David's mistake. We prepared a cashier's check for an offer that was, by Polish standards, a life-changing fortune, but by Oakhaven Crest standards, an absolute bargain. It was a little more than half of what the land was actually worth, but it would be a clean, immediate cash payment. For a retiree in a small village, it would be irresistible. We also had a second document drawn up, a cease and desist order to be delivered to David and the construction company the moment the land deed was signed and filed. 2 weeks later, Alina called. I found him, she said simply. He's living in a small village called Zakopane in the Tatra Mountains. He's 82 years old, a widower, lives a simple life. The villagers know him as the quiet man who used to work in America. The moment had come. There was no time to waste. David was pouring more and more money into the ground every single day, strengthening his psychological, if not legal, claim. I booked a flight to Krakow. Arthur, energized by the most exciting case he'd had in years, insisted on coming with me. We flew overnight, arriving groggy but determined. We rented a car and drove 3 hours south, the landscape changing from cityscapes to rolling hills and finally to the dramatic, jagged peaks of the Tatra Mountains. Zakopane was like something from a storybook. Wooden houses with intricately carved gables, smoke curling from chimneys, and the crisp, clean air of the mountains. Following Alina's directions, we found Mr. Kowalski's small cottage at the edge of the village. An old man with kind, watery blue eyes and a crown of white hair answered the door. He looked at us with confusion, leaning on a cane. He spoke no English, and my Polish was limited to hello and thank you. This was where Arthur, a man of surprising talents, took over. He spoke fluent, if slightly rusty, Polish, a skill he'd picked up from his grandparents. For an hour, Arthur spoke with Mr. Kowalski in calm, measured tones. He explained who we were. He laid out the documents on the small, worn kitchen table. He explained that the LLC registered in his name, a favor he had done for his old boss decades ago, was the legal owner of a very valuable piece of land in America. The old man's face was a canvas of disbelief. He shook his head, insisting it was a mistake. He remembered Marcus Thorne, but the details of the paperwork were a fog. He was just a foreman. He signed what he was told to sign. Arthur patiently explained that it was no mistake. Then he presented our offer. He slid the cashier's check across the table. Mr. Kowalski stared at the number, his eyes widening. He picked it up with a trembling hand, holding it close to his face as if to read it by feel. He looked at Arthur, then at me, and spoke in a torrent of Polish. Arthur translated. He says this is more money than his entire village sees in a year. He asks if this is a trick. Tell him it's not a trick, I said, my voice steady. Tell him it's the back pay he's owed for a lifetime of loyalty to a man who tried to use him. It's his money. All he has to do is sign. Another long conversation followed. We weren't pushy. We drank the tea his daughter, who had arrived to check on him, offered us. We answered their questions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Kowalski picked up the pen we'd provided. With a shaky but resolute hand, he signed the deed transfer and the purchase agreement. We had a local notary, arranged in advance by Alina, witness and stamp the documents. It was done. The quiet acquisition was complete. As of that moment, I, Stephen, the pathetic son, was the legal and sole owner of the 5 acres of land upon which my sister's mansion was being built. We left Mr. Kowalski and his tearfully grateful daughter sitting at their kitchen table, staring at a check that would secure their family for generations. As we drove back down the mountain, the enormity of it all began to sink in. This wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a fundamental shift in the balance of power. For my entire life, I had played by the rules in a game that was rigged against me. So I had used their own arrogance, their own sloppiness to change the game itself. The trap was set. All that was left was to wait for the perfect moment to spring it. The perfect moment presented itself 1 week later. The deed had been electronically filed with the county by Art. Her's office. The cease and desist letters were printed, sealed in envelopes, and ready to be delivered by a courier service first thing the next morning to David's office, Jessica's home, and the main office of the construction company. Everything was in place. All I needed was the stage. My mother provided it. She called on a Tuesday evening, her voice brimming with that familiar, patronizing cheerfulness. "Stephen, darling, I was just driving past your area and thought I'd pop in. I brought you some leftovers from the club." The club was her and Jessica's new favorite pastime, a hideously expensive golf and country club that David had bought them memberships to. The leftovers were her excuse. She was on a reconnaissance mission, likely sent by Jessica to see if I was still stewing over their last visit. "Of course, Mom, come on over," I said, my voice betraying nothing. 20 minutes later, she was sitting in the same spot on my couch where she had delivered her pathetic verdict weeks ago. She placed a Tupperware container on my coffee table with a thud. "It's the lobster risotto. I know you'd never make something like this for yourself." "Thank you, Mom, that's very thoughtful," I said. I went to the kitchen. "Can I get you some tea?" "That would be lovely, dear." I prepared the tea with the deliberate calm of a surgeon. I chose a delicate porcelain teapot and 2 matching cups, items I'd bought for myself that I knew she would consider quaint. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my own space, my own narrative. This was my house, my tea, my terms. I returned to the living room and placed the tray on the table between us. I poured her a cup, the fragrant steam of chamomile filling the air. She took a sip, sighed contentedly, and began her performance. "You'll never believe the progress at the site," she said, her eyes sparkling. "They've started framing the second floor. It's just massive, Stephen. You can finally see the scale of it. Jessica is on cloud 9. She's already picked out a name for the estate." "Oh," I asked, taking a sip of my own tea. "She's calling it the Residence," Brenda announced, as if revealing the name of a royal heir. "Simple, elegant, powerful, that's Jessica for you." "The Residence," I repeated, letting the name hang in the air. "It has a nice ring to it, very permanent." "Exactly," she beamed, thrilled that I was finally getting it. David says at this rate they'll be in by Christmas. Imagine Christmas at the residence. It will be the event of the season. I let her talk for another 5 minutes. I learned about the panic room, the wine cellar, and the rooftop terrace. I nodded along, my expression one of mild interest. The more she talked, the higher she climbed, completely unaware of the ground crumbling beneath her. Finally, she paused, seeming to remember why she was there. She softened her expression, reaching over to pat my hand. And we'll have a special room set aside just for you, dear, so you don't have to feel left out. That was it, the final condescending straw. I gently moved my hand away and took another slow sip of tea. I placed the cup down on its saucer with a quiet, deliberate click. Mom, I began, my voice perfectly level. There's something we need to talk about regarding the house. Her smile faltered slightly. What about it? Is something wrong? She asked, likely expecting me to confess my jealousy. Construction at the residence is going to stop tomorrow morning, I said. She blinked, confused. What are you talking about? Did something happen with the permits? David handles all of that. The permits are irrelevant now, I explained. You see, David and Jessica have been building on land they don't own. They have a lease agreement, a provisional one, but they never secured the actual title from the legal owner. Brenda stared at me, her mind clearly struggling to process my words. That's ridiculous. David is an investment banker. He wouldn't make a mistake like that. Who is this legal owner? I held her gaze, the moment stretching into a taut silence. I let the weight of the unspoken truth settle in the space between us. I said quietly. I am the legal owner. I bought the land last week. The deed was filed this morning. My mother's face went through a rapid series of transformations. Confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, pure, unadulterated rage. Her teacup rattled in its saucer as her hands started to tremble. You're lying, she whispered, her voice cracking. This is a sick joke, Stephen, a cruel, jealous, pathetic joke. It's not a joke, I replied, my calmness a stark contrast to her escalating panic. I flew to Poland and met with the registered owner, a man named Stanislaw Kowalski. I made him an offer and he accepted. It's all perfectly legal. Arthur Vance handled the transaction. You remember him, Dad's lawyer. The mention of my father's trusted lawyer seemed to pierce her denial. The color drained from her face. She looked around my living room at my pathetic walls as if seeing them for the first time. She was realizing this wasn't an emotional outburst. This was a calculated, strategic move. Why, she finally choked out, why would you do this to your sister? To my sister, I asked, my voice finally taking on a cold edge. You came into my home, a place I built with my own work, and you called it pathetic. You and Jessica have spent my entire life treating me as an afterthought, a measuring stick for her greatness. You thought David's money made you invincible. You thought you could build a monument to your own egos on a foundation of arrogance. I leaned forward. You were wrong. You didn't just insult my house, Mom. You gave me a reason to look closer at yours, and I found the cracks in the foundation. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The teacup fell, shattering on the hardwood, splashing brown liquid across the rug. She didn't even notice. Her eyes were wild. You will fix this, she hissed. You will sell it back to David. You will undo this right now. No, I said simply. I don't think I will. Letters are being sent to David, Jessica, and the construction company as we speak. As of tomorrow morning, they are trespassing on my property. Any further work will result in legal action. She stared at me speechless, her chest heaving. The matriarch, the Queen Mother, had lost all control. In her eyes, I saw the terrifying realization that the family hierarchy, the one she had so carefully maintained for decades, had just been demolished. The golden child had been dethroned, and the quiet, pathetic son was now the king. She turned and stormed out of my house, slamming the door so hard that a picture on the wall rattled. The tea ceremony was over. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. My phone began ringing less than an hour after my mother left my house. The first call was from Jessica. I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was a masterclass in hysteria, a frantic torrent of accusations, threats, and sobs. She called me a monster, a snake, a jealous little nothing who couldn't stand to see her happy. The second call, about 10 minutes later, was from David. His tone was different. It wasn't hysterical, it was cold, threatening, and dripping with condescension, even in his desperation. Listen to me very carefully, you little worm, he began, without so much as a hello. I don't know what kind of stupid game you think you're playing, but it's over. My lawyers will bury you. We have a contract. We've invested millions. No judge in the country will side with you. I let him finish his tirade. When he was done, I simply said, "My lawyer is Arthur Vance. I'm sure your lawyers have his number. Have them call him." Then I hung up. I knew David's bluster was the last gasp of a man who knew he was caught. He could posture all he wanted, but he knew the law. A signed deed beats a provisional contract every single time. The next morning, as promised, the couriers delivered the cease and desist letters. The construction site at Oakhaven Crest fell silent. The symphony of hammers and saws was replaced by an eerie quiet. The half-framed skeleton of the residence stood against the skyline like a modern ruin, a monument to hubris. The days that followed were a siege. My family, accustomed to getting their way through sheer force of will, tried every tactic in their playbook. Brenda alternated between tearful voicemails about tearing the family apart and angry texts demanding I do the right thing. Jessica tried to rally public opinion, posting vague, dramatic stories on her social media about a deep family betrayal and unseen enemies trying to tear down what we're building. It backfired. Her followers, used to endless posts about luxury and perfection, were confused by the cryptic melodrama. David, true to his word, had his high-priced corporate lawyers contact Arthur. The conversation, as Arthur later relayed to me, was brief. They postured and threatened for 10 minutes, and Arthur listened patiently. When they were finished, he calmly faxed them a copy of the notarized, filed deed of sale from Stanislaw Kowalski. There was no follow-up call. About a week into the stalemate, the tone shifted from aggression to negotiation. David called me himself. His voice was strained, all the previous arrogance gone, replaced by a desperate, pragmatic edge. "Okay, Stephen, you win," he said, the words sounding like they were physically painful for him to utter. "What do you want? Name your price. We'll buy the land from you, just name a number." This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment of absolute power. I could have named an astronomical sum enough to bankrupt him. I could have tripled my investment. The vengeful part of me was tempted, but as I sat in my quiet living room, the rue my mother had called pathetic, I realized something. It wasn't about the money, it was about respect. It was about severing a toxic connection that had defined my life. "I'm not selling it to you, David," I said calmly. What do you mean you're not selling it? Everyone has a price," he sputtered. "You're right," I said, "and my price is that I never have to deal with you, Jessica, or my mother in a business capacity ever again. The land is not for sale, not to you." I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, the sound of a man whose entire world, built on the idea that everything is transactional, was collapsing. I did eventually sell the land. 3 months later, I sold it to a well-regarded nonprofit developer who specialized in building high-quality, accessible housing for veterans. I sold it to them for exactly what I had paid for it, not a penny more. My only condition was that they had to tear down the half-built monstrosity and start fresh. It was a symbolic gesture. The ground had to be cleansed. The fallout within the family was permanent. Jessica and David were financially devastated. They had poured their liquid assets into the foundation and framing. The loss, combined with the public humiliation, was a fatal blow to their lifestyle. They had to sell their fancy cars, and David's patrons for the art gallery dried up. The last I heard, they had downsized to a condo, and David was facing scrutiny at his firm for the reckless personal investment. My mother refused to speak to me. To her, I had committed the ultimate sin. I had proven her golden child to be fallible. I had shattered the illusion she had spent a lifetime creating. The silence was painful, but it was also liberating. I used the money I got back from the land sale to pay off the rest of my mortgage. My pathetic little house was now truly, completely mine. One afternoon, Mr. Henderson came over. We were sitting on my back patio, looking at the old oak tree. "You know," he said, "a foundation isn't just about concrete and steel. It's about what's solid, what's real, what you can count on." I looked around at my small, quiet, peaceful home. The air was free of tension, of judgment, of the need to perform. I had torn down their mansion, but in the process I had built something far more valuable for myself. I had laid a new foundation, one built not on envy or arrogance but on self-respect, and it was strong enough to last a lifetime.